Welcome back, everybody, to Two Guys in a Stack of Comics. My name's Mike. Along with me is Reed over there. And of course, there's the stack of comics right there for you. Today, we're going to be talking about Superman and Lois Lane, one of the original comic book couples, if not the original superhero comic book couple of all times. And I think she goes all the way back to the first Action Comics, right?
Yeah, she's close. She's one of the first
If she
appearances
wasn't in
for
that one,
sure.
she was in the next issue for sure. And she's been going strong for nearly 80 years now,
85
or
years or something like
80,
that. Yeah.
85 years now. So, but yes, some people love her, some people hate her. And today we're going to break it all down for you. And
Yeah, I think it's interesting is you and I have done a couple videos about DC Comics and a couple things about what's wrong with DC. And we did a specific one about Superman. And what's interesting is, we've seen this in the comments and I kind of looked into it a little bit more. It's a larger portion of fan base than I thought, but there's a lot of people who either believe Superman should never be with anyone else other than Lois Lane, that is intricately tied to him as anything. And there are others who think Lois is the reason Superman is held back in popularity, that it grounds him too much, that it um, kind of makes him, in a word, like just kind of limited as a character. So we just thought we'd talk about our thoughts on that and maybe a little bit about just relationships and comic books, period, and positives and negatives of those and how much it contributes to a character. But we'll kind of keep it Lois focused there. So Mike, for you, Superman and Lois Lane, do you think it would help the character of Superman if they kind of broke him off of, I don't want to say divorced, because Superman should not get divorced. But do you think it would help Superman if Lois Lane was maybe written out of the picture or they rewrote history to remove her? Like, what do you think?
absolutely not. Absolutely not.
Very succinct.
No, you cannot get rid of Lois Lane. She's iconic. She is there for a reason, and she's been there since the beginning. You can't get rid of her. You can have a story arc where maybe they break up and Superman has other love interests. Maybe Wonder Woman or something exciting like that.
Like the
But
new 52. Yeah.
you always got to come back to Lois. I mean, it's built in. It's like peanut butter and jelly. You can't undo that sandwich. It was made that way for a reason, and it's because they work so good together. Um, for those who think that maybe it's boring, these are probably the Superman fans that think that Superman is a boring character because he is the big blue, the Cub Scout of the all superheroes. But he's got his girl. He was written that way. You can't not have Superman without Lois Lane. You just can't do it. I can't wrap my brain around it.
It's interesting in that I've seen some of the thoughts on it, and there is a portion of me that can understand where people are coming from. And so I want to make sure I don't believe anybody's 100% wrong or 100% right on things. But I do think, and I think there's some points. I think the new 52, the Wonder Woman and Lois or Superman relationship was pretty good. I thought that was an interesting wrinkle, and I think it differentiated things. I think for me, they should never break up though. And I think the reason I believe that is I think Superman to me, he's a guy who could have any woman in the world, but he really just loves his like coworker lady and he respects her so much. And why I love that about Superman is it truly is the grounding thing that makes Superman the character that he is. This is a guy with godlike powers, godlike abilities, but his honestly most fondest desire is to just be a normal man. Like that's what I always loved about Superman is in all honesty, he is so not like us, except for he really wants to be like us. He wants to just have the wife at home and the kids and the house and the farm and all that stuff. And I think to me, that's the dichotomy of Superman. It's kind of interesting in that I think part of why I love it too is I love the dichotomy of Superman, this alien who should be distant and disparate from humanity and he doesn't understand things, is actually the man with a wife and kids and a steady job. And Batman, the human character, can't do commitment, can't get married, and is just he's almost inhuman. And I love that balance and that kind of yin and yang that it brings. It's not to say that you can't do a storyline where Superman doesn't end up with Lois Lane, but I would agree. I think in the main continuity, Lois has to be Superman's love interest. I think there are certain characters that if you take them out of the picture, it just doesn't feel like the character anymore. And I think, the three that I would say most have that. I don't think you can ever do Fantastic Four without Reed and Sue. I think that destroys the entire Fantastic Four dynamic if you ever break that up. And I think Spider-Man with Mary Jane, that has become, and I think that's largely why the Spider-Man comic books feel so aimless in the last kind of 20 years since they really sort of permanently broke up that relationship. And I think it's why you see such excitement for Ultimate Spider-Man where they're together. There's just certain elements that fit and fit well. And when that works, it gives that character a definitive feel. And I feel like a Superman without Lois Lane, to be honest, it's almost like it's not Superman for me. Like that, it just feels a bit too. And maybe that's the trap of nostalgia. I could say that. I'll fully say maybe that is nostalgia speaking for me, where it's like I just don't. But it's almost like if someone would say we're going to rewrite Star Wars and Han Solo doesn't end up with Leia. Like, no, how are you going to do that? Like, I don't.
No,
But
you can't do that.
I get it. I will say, I mean, there are a lot of people who make that point though, that Lois kind of holds him back. And so I think the thing is, what I will say, and this is where me and you can kind of expand on this a bit. Some folks say the critiques I've heard of Lois, because she's got no power, she can really only serve as the damsel in distress or something that tethers Superman too much to Earth. If you heard that criticism, and let's say I put you in charge of Superman, and they said, hey, you got to do something with Lois because we don't know what to do with her. What do you think a right approach would be to make Lois Lane a little bit more interesting so that she's not just, oh, the tough reporter or the damsel in distress? What do you think they could try to do with Lois?
I like the way they handled her character in the Henry Cavill movies. I
Okay.
really, I really do. Where she was a really adventurous reporter, very strong-willed. She was written that way in the beginning. She was, and really kind of an iconic figure in a way. You think of in the 1930s of this self-made woman who had a career, very independent, but tended to get in trouble and fall off a building sometimes, and
Get
Superman was
captured by
always there to
giant
get her.
robots,
Yeah,
etc. Yeah.
yeah. And so no, the character was designed with her, and she just grew up with Superman, and we all grew up with them. You can't have one with the other. Like I said, you could write, stories and incidents that go off one way or the other, but there's a reason that sandwich works, and that's because there's peanut butter and there's jelly, and that's why that sandwich works. And that's just the way the character was designed. I think it's a little short-sighted or misguided to think that she's holding him back. Nothing holds Superman back except for Lois. If she were, but like you said, she's part of the human race. She's part of humanity. He wants to be part of humanity, and she helps this character who is larger than life, like you said, godlike powers, stay grounded, and you need that in a character like that. Otherwise, you go off on a tangent, and then you get the evil dictator Superman that they, you know what I mean, and it just goes wacky. And, you can have that for a storyline here and there, but you can't put Big Blue in he can't be running around town like a bachelor, trying to pick up chicks. I mean, that's just not what's going on. What's going on? He's got his girl, and that is very endearing to that character.
Yeah, I think there's a couple things I can go with. If you told me, okay, if these are the complaints about Lois, and again, I think there are some found as someone who's read Superman for largely my entire life,
you
I
you
do
gotta
think
you gotta have the chops to write a good Lois. I
you
mean,
got to, yeah, you
it's
got to get
it's
writers.
easy to write a story about a guy that has godlike powers, but writing a story that combines him with a regular person, and they're in an intimate relationship, that takes a little more chops. You
Well,
got
yeah,
to
I
be
think
willing.
that's
Maybe the reason why Lois is boring is nobody's writing her the way she needs to be written.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing is I think Lois is only boring because in all honesty, what I will say is again, this is nothing against the writers of the current Superman comics or anything like that. They just don't have an interesting story wrinkle for her, but that's not Lois's fault. That's makes some more interesting writing. I think the thing is you have to give her a path that works. I think to me, the obvious path that I would take with it, and I don't know, people may hate this, but one of the interesting things that I really loved about Batman comic books is the way Batman kind of had the perfect Batman I thought was in the comic book Hush, where he has Alfred as kind of his support, but then he had Barbara Gordon as like this oracle character who was kind of his comms, his guy in the chair kind of role. I don't know why they don't use Lois for that. I think that would be fascinating to see Lois become more intricately involved, kind of like the Team Flash thing, except for just one person instead of like 19 people that they ended
Right.
up with. But I think it would be really interesting if you had that Lois was a little more involved with Superman's stuff using her reporting skills. And I think you could have I would love to see an interesting thing where Lois, as a reporter, wants to get more detective skills or more investigative abilities, and maybe she mentors or learns from Batman, and Batman teaches her the detective side of things, and maybe you kind of expand that a little bit. I think if you start having things where Lois becomes a bit more analytical and smart and can bring some things to Superman, where if they're working together, you show her value. Because right now it's just kind of Lois's generic reporter. Lois goes off, and we don't really care about the story because they don't spend time in it. You're just supposed to. Lois is a Pulitzer Prize person. I think you need to bring that home by putting parts of the comic book in there where Lois's investigations directly tie into things, and maybe she uncovers something and realize, hey, this can't be fixed, and hey, good thing I know Superman who can fix this, and bring some context to it. I think the other part is I think Lois being involved with the Justice League is like a go-between for them, as someone who gives them information, kind of serving as like that oracle role. And I know Barbara Gordon has served as that before. They don't really use her for that as much anymore. And I think Lois would be an interesting go between to have that. I don't know if that path would work. But what I agree with you on is it's not that Lois is a bad character. I think it's that largely people just kind of write her out of the comic books, and they miss the part. They almost treat Superman now like he's such a complete character that he doesn't even really need Lois. And I think what we need to get back to is we need to get back to stuff where you show why that matters to him and why that brings him home. And while I've always loved that relationship, how it's been portrayed in media, I think with certainly the Chris Reeves Margot Kidder one from the 70s is probably the most classic one. I think the Superman and Lois show has done a wonderful job of that. And I really liked what they did on Smallville as well with Tom Welling and Erica Durant. I think the thing is, we have to get comic book writers who I think, honestly, like I know we talk about getting diversity in writing and stuff like that. And I think largely it's cool to get different people with different perspectives. But like, I wonder how many of these comic book creators that are writing like are married and have really good marriages. Because the thing is, like, not that I'm Superman in any way, shape, or form, but the thing is, if you removed my wife from my life, how much that would drastically alter me as a human being on a fundamental level where like it would just change every single aspect of my life. And to be honest, the majority of everything I do during my working hours in there is to get home to my wife and kids. And I think with Superman, they sometimes just kind of forget that. And it's kind of like, yeah, he's just Superman. He just goes home. And I think you have to put some character work into it where you show the impact of that and the value of that. And that I just think they've
She's
left
his
that behind.
reason. She's his reason.
Yeah.
And if you remove that, then you get the evil Superman who can be dictator of the world and King Soups, whatever, the weird, wacky stories like that. No, that's not the character. But yeah, I mean, you can't have one without the other. It's the sandwich. It's
Yeah.
got to go together.
Well, and I think this is largely just an issue with God. And here's the thing: I've seen people say like they liked him with Wonder Woman. I actually think that's not a bad pairing in an alternate universe. I think that's again multiverse. DC, if you want to do multiverse, do it there, right? Like this absolute Superman, absolute Wonder Woman. Explore that relationship there. I think that'd be really interesting. I think you could show it would differentiate the character. It would be something that would work. But I think main continuity, I would always keep them together. You just need to put more character work into Lois. I think that's what's interesting is Batman, the good runs, like Jeff Loeb, and I think well, mostly Jeff Loeb, what he's done with the character in like The Long Halloween and in Hush, the way he used Catwoman in the Batman comic books really made that relationship work. And that as a Batman fan, I always kind of thought that was just a pointless relationship, but just it's this burglar Batman has the hots for, so we won't mess with her. But it's like when they showed in the books like why those characters worked, it really brought something to it. And I think if you get a writer who can put the work into Lois the way that characters like Jeff Loeb did, or that, I think a lot of great writers have done with Spider-Man with Mary Jane, you kind of get why that's essential to it. And I don't think it's so much the character's weak. I think it's just the writing on the character's been bad, and you need to get that. It's interesting. We'll talk on one more thing here because I think it's interesting to get into since we kind of opened the door on it. Comic books and comic book movies lately. I feel like the romantic love interest part of comic books has gone away. And I think the weirdest thing with that, and I'd be interested to get your thoughts. What's weird about comic books is the love interest part of it. Like, I know it's more men who read comics and stuff like that than there's women fans and all that. But it is kind of the soap opera part that you are invested in comic books. And for some reason, there just seems to be such a reluctance anymore to address that. And then, like, I look at movies lately, the last 10 or 12 MCU movies, there's like not even a love interest in the movies. And I think, like, you look at the all-time great films like Spider-Man 2 and stuff like that, that was such an integral part of it because it makes the character there. Do you think culturally that's been removed because people don't know what to do with the love interest character? Or do you think people thought it was a useless part of the medium?
I really do. And one of the great women creators, Trina Robbins, once said that you got to be able to write the female characters correctly, and if they're written well, your audience will respect and respond. Um, One of the great things that made those early Spider-Man movies so great is because the female characters were written pretty well, and you could take your date to the movie who may not be a comic book fan, but she still gets a little bit of that rom-com, and she can understand and relate to the lady who's caught up in an affair with an exciting, male figure. Um, so yeah, you got to be able to write the women characters well. It always makes for a better comic when your characters have a little bit. And we guys, we like the romance too. We
It
like
just
to hear.
makes the
Yeah,
character, that's the relatable piece of the character that I think we can all get
yeah.
respond to is that, you
The
know,
rest of it is like pure fantasy, but
the
that
rest is pure fantasy. And like, again, like, yeah, you're not going to be Bruce Wayne who can walk in and get every woman that you want. But the fact of Batman's relationships in his comics and that balance, where I always liked the relationship part of comic books is it's not necessarily that I needed the romance aspect in the comic book, but it was the best way to show the price the character pays. And that, like, Peter Parker was always, that's right. Spider-Man 2 is just such an amazing character study because you see how much Peter is losing for being Spider-Man at
yeah.
every turn. Like, he constantly has to give up his happiness to be this figure. And I think when you remove that aspect from it, whether it's for Wonder Woman or for Batman or for Spider-Man or whoever it is, that foundational piece, it's so interesting the push to kind of, I think, remove that aspect from things that movies have done. And I think it's why the MCU's kind of lost a little bit of engagement. Is, you look at the early movies, that Steve Rogers and Peggy Carter relationship, people got invested in. Tony and Pepper, it wasn't the best done, but Jane and Thor, Peter and MJ. I mean, like, that gives you a tether and some stakes into the storytelling where you care about that character, not just on a what's the costume, who are they punching. It's more of a, man, there's actual stakes for this. I really do think in superhero films, man, you look at it and it's like all the Captain Marvel films haven't done it. The Shang-Chi movie didn't do it. There's no emotional tether in these films. Black Panther, Wakanda Forever didn't touch that at all. Like a lot of these movies that have been disappointing for folks, that aspect is just not even in there. And I think that's such a fundamental human part of storytelling to have that part of the life portrayed in a character, because no matter whether you're married or single or divorced or whatever your thing may be, a character's relationship status kind of thing, well, it's not the most important thing. It is something where it tells you a little bit about that character, in the same way that, like, anybody who would meet me, you meet my wife, you probably understand quite a bit about me just from meeting her.
The little things, in between, the pages where there's the fight scenes and the little dialogues that they have with their friends and their love interests really helps round out the story. And I think we lost a lot of that in the 90s where, it was all about action, and comic books went to these grandiose arcs with, where it was all action.
Multiversal stakes, and yeah.
Yeah, and but it's the little moments like that that make a film and make a comic, and make the character more enduring, when you read those stories. And it might only be a few panels, but it helps you to understand the why, and it builds more gravitas, for the action scene that's about to happen.
Yeah, I,
Absolutely.
I think to kind of bring it full circle on it, I think when I was a kid, one of the seminal comics that I read as a kid that has always stuck with me was the death of Superman. I remember reading that final battle with Doomsday, that issue where I think it's Superman 75 where he dies. And when I was a kid, there's a part right before he goes to the final portion of Doomsday, and this fight's been going on for hours. And Superman gets 1 minute before he knows it's probably the end. He goes and he sweeps Lois and he kisses Lois, and then he goes off to fight, and it's ultimately that. And like Superman was kind of weak and waning, and he does that moment, and it gives him the energy to go finish the fight. And when I was a kid, I read, I was like, he's just kissing his girlfriend. As an adult, that always hits me more now of like, not that you'll ever be in that fight with Doomsday, but
Yeah.
that wife character, that thing where like life just beats you over the head. That other person, that thing that you find where like that, just that moment that gives you like the no, I will see this through because I have that person. I think missing that is huge. And I think they've got to get back to some of that in storytelling because it's such a foundational piece of not only storytelling, but humanity and having that there. And I think we need to get back to that a bit. But as always, folks, let us know what you guys think below. I know some of folks, I'm pretty sure we'll see in the comments some people who have their thoughts on the Lois Lane portion. Did we do anything that kind of dissuaded that? Or if not, or if you're a fan of the relationship, did we hit those points? Most importantly, if you have a different perspective from us, that's absolutely fine. We love seeing that. One of the greatest things about this medium and the greatest thing about having this YouTube channel for me and Mike is seeing the different thoughts, seeing the different perspectives, seeing what people think. It's always so fantastic to see people's perspectives. That a lot of times it brings things to light where you're like, man, I didn't think of it that way. So if we missed something down below, let us know. Always great to hear from you guys. Thank you so much for watching. God bless you, folks. We'll catch you in our next video.
Thanks, everybody.